Hello, everyone. Welcome to EA Zoom meeting. My name is Tara All, and I am going to share about planets on the first, a technique, and then specifically choosing Mercury first. And we're going to have some volunteers jump in and play around with this. Before I jump in, I wanted to share a couple of things because they're up for me right now. For the past 3 years, I have been playing with the technique planets on the first, which is choosing a planet, moving it to the ascendant, and then you choose to experience life through that planet as a filter. It's almost like if that planet were asking questions or being the lead role in the play that is your life, it is the one that steps forward and meets life, just like the ascendant does. And so the first year I did Venus, and the second year I did Mercury, and I'm just wrapping up my year with Mars. And so this is not to be frightening, because I actually think it gives the technique a little bit more power. But I gotta say, when I hit 11 months of Mars first, I Marsed out. Like, I've been having to retreat and take some time off. So that being said, one thing I'm going to play around with next year is choosing 2 planets, choosing an axis and seeing what the balance does. But I throw this out there because a lot of people ask me, I just spoke at UAC, and one of the questions was, well, you know, what if I don't do it for a whole year? What if I just do it for a month at a time or a week at a time? And I think bite-sized pieces are good. And I think it's really easy to overdo. So that being said, my living example will come out, and I'll probably share a few more things as we go through. But let's hop in, because today we're going to focus on choosing Mercury first. So what is a planet on the first? Technically, we move the planet that we want to choose to embody or work with primarily, and we move it to the ascendant by rotating the zodiac. So most software, like in SolarFire, you can click where you normally would choose house systems, you know, Placidus or Porphyry, whatever it is you choose. And there actually is a choice there for Venus first, Mars first, all the main planets. So most software just moves things around. So the birth time stays the same. And I just always like to emphasize that the geophysical moment of a planet first hasn't ever occurred. So what we're doing is we're playing around with what we're given a little bit. So in that sense, it is an artificial chart. All right, so to me, choosing a planet first, and I get excited about, same as like astrodrama and a lot of these things that we can do. I love experiencing things. Well, sometimes I like to live in my head, but experiential things, they really like settle, you know, like your body absorbs it, your heart absorbs it, you have a new level of understanding. And so I have such a passion for astrology, and it takes a lot of my mental faculties, which are awesome, I mean, along with my intuition. But I've really enjoyed playing with this technique because it's gotten me out of that structure and really into more of like, hey, what's happening in my life and how can I actually choose to actualize and play around with the chart, if you will. So it's this conscious choice to experience life through the filter of a particular part of your psyche. You know, to me, and I don't think this is probably new to most of you, but it always helps me to remember that all those planets, the planets are each representing an aspect of our psyche. So collectively, all the planets are our psyche. And so this is why we say, you know, the planets are us. I mean, we are the planets. This is just choosing to live from one of them. And I always use the example of, you know, if your whole being or psyche were a house, you know, with an attic and a basement and a backyard, but if you've always stayed on the back porch, for example, it's not that all the other spaces are not there, it's just that you just like hanging out on the back porch. So if you move to the basement, for example, you would find and see and experience new things about yourself, not because they're new, but just because you have focused your attention or your consciousness or your choice of where to center yourself in a different place. So what we do with planets first is we say, hey, let's shake that up a little bit, which is really awesome if you have particular parts of yourself that feel stagnant or stuck, or if you're trying to reclaim something, really muscle up on something, or have a more intimate experience with a part of yourself. This is a real active way of saying, hey, I'm going to choose this part of me. So this idea of it being a new perspective or a view or a lens, again, it's not a new part of you, and you are the filter. right? So you're just choosing a different part of you, or a leading character, which is a way that helps me look at it. Sometimes I imagine myself as like everybody around this big board table, like a big board meeting. All these players are there, and it's really about, you know, who's in charge of that meeting, who's leading that meeting, and that changes. And when you learn astrology, you can kind of see throughout the day, wow, that's really my Saturn. Oh, that's really my Venus. That's really my, and this is kind of what we're going for, is to feel those nuances more, and then being able to choose which one, and to choose in a ways that really serves us and serves those around us. You know, sometimes it's great Venus time, and sometimes, you know, it's really awesome Saturn time. So this is just what it looks like chart-wise. This is just an example of my chart with Venus first. It's just to show you what it looks like when the chart is rotated. So you can see that all the planets are in the same signs. The aspects are the same. The only thing that's changed is because my Venus is at 0 degrees Cancer. 0 degrees Cancer, 5 minutes, becomes the rising sign, becomes the ascendant, and then everything falls out. So the houses change, right? So you can see, for example, that normally for me, I've got all that cluster of Cancer stuff sitting down at the base of the chart. When I move Venus, or Mercury First for that matter, I had that stuff brought right up into the first house. It means it's more noticeable, more physical, more part of my spontaneous expression. Gives it different agency, if you will. So something to think about, you know, when you're playing around with this, look and see where things fall out. You know, but other things will change, right? So my Chiron normally in the first house, well, you know, when I did Venus first year, Chiron was in the 10th, right? A different experience of my Chiron for me. So I just offer this first when we think about planets first. The first thing is really to have fun with it. And this is a fun way to play with astrology and to get people around you to play, you know, like at work, you know, with my coworkers, like, you know, they've chosen planets and we laugh about it and play around with it and they say, oh, I can really see you doing your Mars first. And it's a fun way to start meaningful conversations and to really let different parts of yourself be shared and seen. And I do think it's really important that, you know, no one can tell you who you are because they don't know. So your chart, astrology, any of these tools we have, I mean, the eye, as we know it on the deeper and higher level, it's unknowable, truly unknowable with the human brain. So I just always hold that even when we're doing these exercises and saying, I want to learn more about me, which I'm a big proponent of, it's not because I expect to figure out who I am or for someone else to figure out who I am. Right? It's to allow the truth to reveal as it does, moment by moment. And I believe that we're all pioneers in the frontier of ourselves. So this idea of kind of pushing into new territory and checking it out is a really healthy way to learn. We're not supposed to know all the answers. So Planets First is a great way to actually throw out some new questions and to think about the question side more than trying to answer the questions. And so for me, here's why I think Planets First works for me and for the people that I know who are choosing it. When we choose and what we choose and think about and believe in, it really does create our reality. And this is why when I choose a planet first, it actually happens for me. You know, I'm really picking that frequency and then that channel runs through me. Now, it's going to run through me in the way that is my nature, as it will with you, meaning my Mercury is going to be different than your Mercury on the first. But when we choose a frequency and we really tune in and let it flow, like when we tune into that radio station that's always been playing, we just weren't tuned into it, you know, we start to see that stream of energy. It starts to manifest for us. And this brings us to, you know, this age-old quote that where our attention goes, energy flows, right? And if we're energy, well, you know, you can put those pieces together. Fun things to play with for me. So big question with planets on the first, do you want something new, right? Because that's what this is about. If you're not someone who's interested in that, and if you really like feeling comfortable with kind of what you've learned and where you're at, which is not, neither one is any better or worse than the other, but this will push you. So if you know you're not in a place of wanting to be pushed, and if you know you don't really want something new, it's probably not the technique for you. So why would we choose a planet first? To meet life with and through a different part of you, which will then enrich the whole of you. But we start with a separate part because our mind can grasp it, right? And we then allow an integration to happen. And to meet yourself from a different perspective. It's almost like You come out, right? Think about the ascendant or the rising as our coming out, how we come out and meet the world, how we come out as an individual, as a separate human being. Well, this is a coming out party, right? Planets on the first is coming out with a new image, and then you play with it. That first house in the ascendant really requires, it's Aries house, so it needs to experience and try things and do things to know what it likes and more of who it is and the direction it wants to go, right? So this is like the permission of planets on the first is let that part play. So a couple other thoughts. Embodiment is how we naturally experience life. It's not living an idea or a concept already created. And this is why choosing a planet first, you'll do it your way. How you naturally embody that planet. Not just what you've read or learned or observed, for example, about Mercury. You'll do it your way. And it is this living of our lives that gives us the ability to define our experience. Right? So as I'm living my life will show me, whoa, I didn't know that I liked that. Wow, I didn't realize that I would respond that way. But it's the living of life that's giving me these experiences. And it's the experiencing our lives that really precedes any form of self-definition, right? So this is what I mean by that. We can't just look at a chart or figure ourselves out from an intellectual standpoint and then say, here's what it is and here's the categories it falls into. We really need life to show us. And the only way that happens is by engaging with life. And that can be done many different ways. This is just one. So choosing a planet on the first is explicitly choosing the facet from which to experience your life from. So just really briefly here, so we're on the same page with the basics. Planets, again, facets of the whole self. And I also believe that every planet is also in every other planet, so they don't truly function alone. But for our purposes, breaking them down is the way that we can digest and understand it. Because if we were to take everything happening all at once, right, cycle upon cycle within cycle, every planet in another planet, it becomes too much for us to comprehend, at least most of the time. At least maybe I should speak for me. It's too much for me. So for me, I like to break it down, but always leave room to know that, hey, this thing is not happening by itself. So that my understanding in that respect is always going to be somewhat limited, but it's still giving me more. And so what is the ascendant? The ascendant is the I am, right? The primal or instinctual underlying self-image that we create. And we create it moment by moment. I always think of Aries as streaming or real-time consciousness. Happening, I am happening moment to moment. And our ego defends this image that we're creating. And in evolutionary astrology, the ego is represented by the moon in the current lifetime. So this ascendant is whom we are to realize ourselves as distinct from anyone or anything that we've known ourselves to be in the past, and also from anything we might become in the future. So it's the me that's happening now. So putting a planet there first is choosing that part of me happening now, which in some respects takes a lot of courage because we're choosing to let go of all the past ways and stories we have connected with how that worked, and with anything we project on the future of how something might happen. So it really is like this choice of, I'm going to show up right now and see. So for me, the first house, like I was saying before, is where we come out. So let's use this for an example. If we go through a deep metamorphosis of the 8th house, in evolutionary astrology, we're very familiar with this, right? Like when we take the deep dive, we go through a transformation. We literally let go of a belief or a pattern or a part or something that has been just dead weight hanging on us, and we let it go. And in this respect, it's the first house from which our butterfly emerges, meaning we don't stay in that cocoon of undifferentiated juice forever. Right? And our wings need to move. So to me, the 8th house is where we go through the metamorphosis, but every birth, every rebirth, every new butterfly's wings coming out to stretch and to move into new directions is coming through the first house. So the ascendant is super important in how we are actualizing through every experience. So, and then just the second point here is it's where we actualize every birth and how we're born. So think like the style, rhythm, and appearance of how you come out in a moment. And this also, even if you're, not super turned on by planets first, just playing with this with your rising sign and the ascendant can give you a new relationship with it. And to really honor that sign and those planets that sit there for you natally, because they are your rebirth and they will be your rebirth. Okay. So the ascendant reflects how everything is instinctually filtered and experienced, and also the subconscious questions we ask ourselves in the moment that kind of govern how we respond or act in the world. So this is just one for each sign. There's a million more you can come up with, and you'll want to, if you're going to play with this for yourself. But for example, if you have Leo rising, a subconscious question will almost always be, am I special? Do I feel special? Will I feel special here? Right? And that will, in some ways, determine how you show up, when you show up, if you show up, these sorts of things. So a planet on the first, this slide says how planets on the first behave. Well, they don't behave, but we respond to this idea and to them as this experiential lens or filter. So I think a better question here is, how do I behave? So I say this to myself with tarot, with my Mars first right now, for example. How do I behave when I choose to experience life through Mars first? Because that's really what we're going for here. How do I behave when I choose this first? So this brings us to Mercury, because this is the one that I really want to play with today, and encourage anyone that if Mercury is speaking to you, this could be a fun way to see what happens and to give your Mercury like some room. So why would you choose Mercury first? So Mercury is rules the in-between, rules twilight, rules the crossing over between things. So if you're looking to cross the barrier into something new in any realm in your life, Mercury needs to have agency. That part of you needs to have agency. If you want to have a new perspective on something, another thing ruled by Mercury, it's a good choice. If you have anything to express or a message to share, Mercury first is your friend. It's an ally. Mercury wants to keep the story going. If you need to get moving in general or get somewhere or get unstuck, Jason Hawley talks a lot about Mercury in mythology, which I am not an expert in, but I picked up little pieces here and there, and he talks about how in stories, Mercury in mythology always keeps things going. So that part of us wants to keep the things connecting, right? Connecting and to moving. So if you're feeling stuck, Mercury can help with that. And if you just know, let's say you are very intimate with your mercurial functions and you just want to give them some agency. You want to get your words on the paper, or you want to take up some sort of speaking function, or communication is becoming more important for you, or just even using your mind in new ways, right? This curiosity shop of life. I think of that very much as being a big piece of Mercury as well. If you want to reveal your story, first and foremost to yourself, but to the world as well. But if you want to uncover the story you've been playing, Mercury is that character. And to reclaim your story. So this idea of reclamation, especially if you have Mercury retrograde, reclaiming your own story, your own thoughts, your own words, what makes sense to you, and to reclaim using your mind as a tool for you to use. To learn more about the nature of your mind and to embrace duality and paradox. So this is kind of the list for me when I say, hey, if any of these things feel like, wow, I'd really like more of that, or I really felt stifled in that, choosing Mercury first is a good way to go. So in counseling or therapeutic use, if I recommend this and use this to strengthen mercurial functions. So it's an invitation for your instinctual mind to lead. And I say that because we're taking Mercury and putting it on the ascendant, which is an instinctual house. So we're taking the mind and adding it with instinct, and we're leaving more room for your own instinctual beliefs, words, ideas, for your own way of making sense of things. Also, it helps us strengthen this being aware of how we've been making sense of things, right? I think of history, to me, is we take facts from something that happened in the past, and then we have like feelings around that, right? So And then our mind adds stories. So I guess where I'm going here with history is it's a combination of things that happened and our emotional reactions to them. It's not, quote unquote, the factual story. It's our experience of the story. And all of us as humans, we have a way of making story around things, which gets us through the day. It's part of our safety. It makes us feel okay. But there's room, to let more truth into that story, or to let go of some old patterns that are not serving us, because it keeps the mental loops running an old story that we may not need to act out anymore today. So these are some of the things around counseling with choosing Mercury first. Just simply focusing on communication, learning, translating, and how things connect, including yourself. One thing for me with Mercury that really came forward, Mercury rules communication, which includes like hormones, all the things in the body that send signals back and forth and talk to each other. So you may or may not be communicating within yourself, and Mercury first is a good way to kind of feel in around how that's happening or isn't happening. It's nice to free up the circuits and let the natural wiring happen. So again, this is back to that first house of the natural, spontaneous expression of who I am, letting like some of those old trenches or even those circuits or nervous system types of things that have become, almost solidified in certain ways. They don't have to stay. Like, we can sort of give them room. So if you're choosing Mercury first, almost kind of think about you here, take a seat in your new chair, and you might ask yourself, well, how do I see, think, and feel when Mercury's first for me? And what are the questions I'm now asking in each moment? How am I meeting life with Mercury first? And how does my personal Mercury experience and respond to other parts of me when it is now on the first? So some questions around Mercury function. Would be, how do I communicate most naturally? So this is something like to watch and observe, give yourself space for, all these things with the style of communication, your voice, tone, the volume, the gestures you use, how close you get to people when you're speaking, and even the environment that you're in, or how and when you communicate, to see kind of how do I naturally do it? And especially in those circumstances where you kind of have to react, like the moment happens and all of a sudden you see, oh, whoa, that came out that way. And how am I naturally wired? How are these parts of me connecting? So as I was speaking about before, this is all about synergy. How do things signal? How do things transfer? It's interesting sometimes, and I'm not a medical astrologer by any means, but I think about it this way because some of us have deficiencies in certain things, or or certain things don't absorb right or in our bodies. And I think sometimes it's not because we're actually lacking the ability to do those things. Sometimes it's because one part isn't talking to another part. And this gets back to the earlier piece when I said that things aren't happening on their own. So it's very hard to go into a body, for example, and say, well, let's just look at this part and fix it, because that part is talking to this part, dependent on this part. So this is something with Mercury that you can kind of subtly start to feel into. So how do I transfer within me? How do things activate within me? How do they deactivate? How do they amplify, intensify, and calming? All these parts of our wiring. And then how do I make sense of things? What is making sense to me, right? If to choose Mercury first, in every moment there's going to be a part of Mercury that always wants to track it. So, what happens when you're sitting somewhere and all of a sudden you're having a conversation and you really can't track it? You can't make sense of it, or you can't figure it out. What ideas, thoughts, and words just arise in me? And this takes some teasing out, because in some ways, we're pre-programmed. Even our language is pre-programmed. We say things sometimes, and oh my gosh, my dad, always used to say that. So it's giving space to see, what naturally arises for me. And then this one, am I experiencing my thought processes as my reality? Right? Because so many times we think it, so we just think it's real. We have an idea and that idea becomes real. And so that's worth looking at. For all of us, whether or not we choose Mercury first, we're thinking things into being. So this other question I have here is, how am I thinking things into being? And am I manifesting, what is truly making me happy in my life? Because if we're not, we really want to look at the mind. We want to look at where our attention is going and where our thoughts are looping, and the language and the conversation that's going on, not just out loud, but inside. So we chose Mercury first, we dropped in the chair, we started having these questions. And so anytime you choose a planet first, it's useful to agree, what does that planet signify? So this is just a little list of those things. Mercury signifies thinking, our story, knowledge, information, duality, going between and over the threshold. So again, think twilight. Mercury in mythology serves as the guide of the soul, which is something to think about also in your natal chart. I mean, to really like sit with that and feel the important role that Mercury has as the guide of your soul in your life. You know, to help you move from one place to another, whether it's just your attention or whether it's, you know, physically from one location to another. Oh, spiritually, emotionally, Mercury is that guide. Also, movement, curiosity, mental intelligence, problem solving, learning, teaching, translating, perception, and categorizing, classification. There are more. This is just to get us going. Okay. And if I take up too much time here, I'll skip some slides because I really want to look at the charts. And if I do that, anyone's always welcome to email me, for I can always send you the full set if you need them. So let's not forget that Mercury, or Hermes, is the trickster. So give yourself room for this. Mercury first should have some room to play. Mercury is without morals. He's a free agent and he swings both ways. We don't generally give ourselves permission to do this, at least not in all realms of our lives. In some ways, you know, this is giving room for our story to emerge, because too much attachment, too much entrenchment, too much dogmatic, any of these things leading in a direction doesn't really leave us room to make a natural choice. Okay, so with Mercury first, we want to give ourselves space for that. He is messenger of the gods. He's god of trade, commerce, herdsmen, travel, thieves, and of language. He takes souls to the underworld. He's the only god in mythology that can take souls to the underworld and then and come back out, going between those worlds. He is mischievous and he's clever and he outwits others. So you pay attention to this, because I will promise you on some level, you use your own Mercury, and you can look at this by sign, house, and aspect, or in transits. However, you will use your own Mercury to outsmart yourself. You will. And it will not always be in your own favor. So it's worth being able to play around with that side of Mercury. He's also the protector and supporter of humans. We see that time and time again in mythology. You know, he wants to guide us around. He's on our side. He just isn't so much about the choosing the right or the wrong kind of thing. You know, he's about helping us create our living story. And in mythology, he shows up to help, and he usually comes at just the right time to save the day. So think about that for yourself. How do you do that for yourself? Do you do that for yourself? How might you even write a story about how you would do that for yourself? Because if you choose Mercury first, that's part of what, you know, part of what you're choosing to do. Mercury is also the magician in the Tarot and the original teacher and author of the Hermetic principles, which are the laws of the universe. So sometimes Mercury gets really trivialized. Oh, it's the left brain logical thinking. It is, but it is so much more and in so many different ways than we typically comprehend or communicate. So I really like to leave a lot of room for Mercury. Anyone that rules thresholds and going between in the twilight, you know, it's not going to be just as it seems. There will always be layers. Okay, so Mercury first, the focalizing crystal. Here would be, and again, I love the idea of choosing it and having a spontaneous process with this, but we usually need something to get us going. So what I do when I start out a new year with a new planet first, or a new time with a planet first, is I do use these little lists that I've made. And on my website, these are all available under planets first. I have the whole document there, so you can pull it out. and choose your planet there if you're not going to do Mercury. But here, so I look at this list and I say, okay, Mercury first. And then if you need to change the questions to fit you, which sometimes I change my own stuff all the time, change it to fit you, the you in that moment. So for me, I would say, okay, Mercury first. Is it interesting? Is it making sense? Can I track it? Am I getting somewhere with it? Does it add up? Am I going to be able to work out the problem? Can I relate to it? Do I want to know more about it? You know, is it witty? Is it clever? Is it smart? Is the story going to keep going? These are the things with Mercury first, and then you will want to kind of bend them in context of yourself and your life. But these are the things, like in every moment with Mercury first, I mean, it's the question, which is going to determine, you know, kind of how you are experiencing the moment and then choosing your moments. You know, if Mercury really matters a lot to you, let's see if it really matters to you that you're interested, but maybe you spent a lot of your life just hanging out and showing up and sticking around even when you weren't interested. You know, this can really give you some strength and authority around choosing, hey, do I really want to be in this situation or in this job or in this relationship or doing this thing if it's really not interesting to me? And just one brief thing on the aspects. So the aspects, the nature of Mercury, since we've now put it on the first, it's going to determine how the planets and aspect are experienced. So here's an example. If we have Mercury on the first, square Saturn in the 10th, it would emphasize resistance and tension between your own ideas and story and the expectations of authority in society as to how things should line up or play out. And you kind of work this through the aspects in your own chart. But, you know, so certainly I would encourage you to look at, if you're choosing Mercury first, look and see the aspects, and now look and see that the houses that things move in, and look to see where those relationships of energy are happening and how they're happening. And briefly, because I always like to point this out because it's been so true for me, when we choose a planet first, if you really go for it, right? If you go for it, it's the first house. It's identity. It's your physical body, right? It's your energy. So when you choose that planet first, to the extent that that planet can physically express, I really believe that it will. It really did for me when I chose, I mean, a lot of you already know this, but when I chose Venus first, I was really skinny, and I started eating just a lot of sugar and like things I hadn't eaten in a long time, and I put on about 20 pounds. I got curvier, like it just happened. Now, my body type is not one that's going to be ginormous, but I'm saying, like, to the extent that your body can, even the motions you'll find, even the activities you do. So this is, Prince is my favorite Mercury example. And so essentially this idea of wit, quickness, ease of motion becomes Mercury, right? So almost like the little magician, you know, the little acrobat. So we see witty, talkative, quick, quirky, alert, bright, nervous energy. Oftentimes we see also this mischievous nature that I talked about, or flirtatious. Mercury, we know with Gemini, you know, rules the hands, talks with the hands, moves the hands. But oftentimes in a body type with Mercury, which of course expresses oftentimes a strong Gemini, we'll see petite or an agile body, oftentimes wiry and flexible, or like elf-like. I will see people with strong Mercury, and I swear their ears, whether they really are or not, they seem to start to point. Also prominent hands, and a high, bright, or shrill, piercing voice, right? So we can all relate to, when we think about Prince singing, you know, When Doves Cry, for example, we can hear that shrill, piercing voice. It comes through. And Prince has Sun and Mercury and Gemini and a Moon Mercury square, right? So you can see these things come through the body. So just be prepared. Like, it's fun to see the body on cellular on every level, like really when you give it room, it's almost like, yay, this part gets to come forward. And this quote too, he says, you know, don't underestimate me. I know more than I say, think more than I speak, and notice more than you realize, right? I mean, if you're going to choose Mercury first, you know, maybe, you know, you can listen to some Prince, you know, channel some of his energy, because I think he got a lot of it going on. He probably still can communicate from wherever he is now. I would not doubt it. All right, so here's the idea. Give Mercury room. And like I was saying, this part of us tricks us all the time. So don't believe the story as facts, and look out for the truth that is fiction. really can say, if you just play around with that a little bit, you will give yourself so much room. All right, so I am not going to spend a bunch of time with my Mercury first. You guys are welcome to ask me questions. Oh, here was an interesting, so I will share this with you. So I have a Mercury-Saturn conjunction, and this is one of my little drawings in my journal during it. And I literally had this because to me, when you choose a planet first, in some respects, the conjunction doesn't go away, but you choose one, so it kind of gets the like, okay, you know, I'm taking the driver's seat here. And so I literally had this like interplay between my Saturn being, you know, I don't think it's funny, you know, this is not, you know, the good way to go or whatnot, and my Mercury just in some ways laughing, which actually served me well, but it didn't feel good in every moment. You know, it was a pull. Okay. So Charlene, I'm going to have you unmute yourself. And as you do that, I'm just going to, I want you to think about this idea, and maybe you could actually share some of your reflections. I'll flip to your chart in just a second, but Mercury taking us through the gateway. Because I think about this gateway, that the gateway is always moving, and the gateway, it's not just in us, but it is us. And so we're going to travel as far as we need to go, and we will learn as many things as we need to learn, you know, so we'll go to the depths like Mercury does, and we'll go as high as we can up to the light that we can. But in some ways, like, we're looking for a magic word, and I don't even think it's a word. So this, in some ways, what I say here is, you know, you'll descend to the darkest depths, you'll face the harshest blinding light until you speak the magic word in silence. And I don't mean for you to make sense of that entirely. I mean for you to feel for the space. And to me, that gives me a flavor of the Mercury space. It says room for something to arise from it. Okay. So, Charlene, you're there, right?
Yep, I'm here.
And you have, for anyone who's listening and not watching, because I know I listen to these all the time without watching, can't see them. You have Scorpio rising. And for all the EA folks, you have Pluto in the 11th. That Pluto is conjunct South Node. Those are both in Virgo, but they're also conjunct Mercury. Mercury is also conjunct Uranus. Both of those are in Libra, and your Mercury is retrograde. So I would say that is a very important Mercury signature. And before we even jump in, I would ask you if you're willing just to maybe to share maybe kind of where you're at and why you were interested in even talking about Mercury first.
Well, you know what's interesting is I just realized that the whole Mercury on the first thing, because I grew up in Massachusetts, but I moved out to Los Angeles about 13 years ago. And when I looked at my chart for Los Angeles, Mercury is actually on the first. So I've actually kind of already been living this. So everything that you've been saying, I've been like, oh yeah, I've been doing that. And that happened. So it's a little wild.
No, it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's perfect. I wonder, and then, I wonder, to me, I always think, so I think of the two things, right? If Mercury is conjunct Pluto, Pluto wants to empower anything that is touching, right? So that's a huge signature of empowering that mind of yours.
Yeah.
If Uranus is on it, it wants to liberate, you know, it wants you to use it in innovative ways. It wants you to break free. And then it's retrograde, so it's a reclamation.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found ways, like, does that happen in your day-to-day life? Does it come out in your work? And what does that look like for you?
Well, growing up, it was more about breaking away, freedom from family.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of that, but I also had a lot of good group relationships as well. But I realized that I also found myself getting, like, I would let groups, I would get a little bit too into the group. Mm-hmm. What am I trying to say here? So I had to find myself within the group. But then when I moved out to LA and actually had Mercury on the first, I've been finding myself literally for the past 13 years, like learning a new story, telling a new story. And actually the one thing that you said that really hit me was like listening to your body. The very first month that I was out here, I was still on the birth control pill, and I had this really, really strong message, just like, get off the pill, get off the pill. I got off in that first month. and my hormones went a little wacky, but then everything evened out because I started focusing on my health a lot more than I did in the past. And also every allergy that I had a lot of hay fever and stuff on the East Coast. On the West Coast, all my allergies went away, gone. So maybe that's one way that it kind of showed up.
Yeah.
Already.
Well, I think about the going off, so birth control pills, and I had my own similar experience of going off of them. But I don't think we really appreciate, most of us in our society here, how much that changes us to like,
yeah, a lot.
suppress and regulate that. You know, I mean, it doesn't, hormones do more than just make our cycles start and stop, you know? And I think that's it sounds to me, and so you had no idea. So when you moved to LA, I'm assuming you didn't move it thinking I'm going to put my Mercury on the first, so that would be like my remedy, right?
No, I just realized it right now. Wow, I'm like perfect person to show up for this particular talk.
Yeah, but it worked for you.
Yeah, it did. Oh, but I have been through quite a lot. Like you were talking about going down into the depths of the underworld. Oh yeah, I've been there.
Well,
it's been a very rocky ride. So.
Yeah. What would you say is so at this point, so my guess would be you probably would choose a different planet first since you already feel like you've been doing it, or do you feel like, it's interesting, like I'm doing Mars first right now, and Mars rules my chart. So initially I was like, well, I already lived that way. I got to tell you, there was such a difference between choosing it and what revealed, you know, versus having it happen. So I would be super curious to see, I mean, not that you need to do it for a year, but I would, especially with you have already been doing it, I'd be so curious to see if anything changed, if you like actively, you know, ran the chart that way and said, you know.
Yeah, well,
do it.
The whole thing with Mercury telling a new story, I mean, I've been telling, since the second I moved out here, it's like my story changed. And it's been about 14 years now. I've lost count at this point. But about a year ago, I'm not sure exactly what was going on, all of a sudden the writing bug in me just like came out. So writing has become a huge thing. I'm normally a visual artist.
That's a big change, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I still do both, but all of a sudden I've been wanting to do a hell of a lot more writing to tell a story. And I even have a novel idea.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And some other short stories. So that's sort of an interesting thing. I sort of feel like, well, I have more than just Mercury on the first now too, but with Mercury, it's, I'm like constantly telling a new story. I kind of feel like I've been consistently reinventing myself over and over again.
Well, if for it
to get old.
Yeah, well, Mercury, like I was saying, I really mean it when I say that the first house and being Aries house, it's streaming consciousness. Like it is now. And if Mercury is a storyteller, there is, if you immerse yourself in it, there is no option but to just be forever creating in the moment, which is exciting, but it also can be terrifying because most of us like to have some semblance of like, okay, I'm okay, you know, if I do this or live this way, like that. What you're describing, I mean, that's a choice to like not know moment to moment, you know, a lot of the time, which is actually freeing for all of us to hear. It's funny,
freeing and scary at the same time.
Absolutely, right? But fear and excitement is the same coin, right? I mean, we don't get to. I guess I feel like if we're going to play, I mean, we can choose. You know, Hermetic principles would say they're the exact same energy.
Yeah.
Whether we polarize to one side, you know, we can move. And that's another Mercury thing, by the way. Choosing Mercury gives you agency to move within a realm of energy easier. You know, to me, Mercury rules the nervous system. Now that can make you twitchy and, you know, overly stimulated. Or, I mean, so there are definitely, this is why I let off my whole talk saying I want to share my Mars experience because, you know, I have a tendency to like, yeah, I'm going for it, you know, and sometimes that's a little too much, right? So that's what I say. When I chose Mercury First, so I've been a writer for a long time, but I had a career in healthcare for a long time, and then my astrology writing, my metaphysical writing was kind of always on the side. It was a year I chose Mercury First that I got my first full-time job leading a writing team, you know, in the area of spiritual writing. So similar to you, I look at it this way, like I always was a writer, but choosing Mercury First gave it agency. And so when I was hearing you talk about like, now I'm really doing it, that's to me, that's also first house, right? I'm actualizing it. So, but it also brings everything to the surface. So I got to say for me, like I did notice things physically, you know, I mean, Mercury in the first house, like stuff popped out, Mars especially, and that could go on all day for all the eruptions and bumps and things with Mars first. But in some respects, I think it feels good to give those parts of us, to let them be seen. And that's part of what the first house is, let it be seen. So any part of you that's a writer versus, and also, by the way, I don't think Mercury is just writing. I think any kind of expression, which can include, visual art. I know we normally give that over to, Libra or more to other areas, but
yeah,
to me, Mercury does rule all parts of it. But
well, my art did sort of become more of my art changed when I moved out here, and it became a little bit more about storytelling. So
yeah,
it's all kind of weaving in.
so you really did do this.
I guess, yeah. But now that I know this, I might be a little more conscious about stuff, which could be interesting.
Yeah, and if you run the chart, then you could look at where like the other, planets fall in the houses, and kind of that gives you a feel too, gives you more room to work with. And maybe, honestly, like, who knows, like maybe those 13 years where you're, that was priming you for now, like the ultimate choice. And then who knows?
That's kind of what I feel like.
Oh my gosh, your moon in Leo up in the 9th house, like maybe this is just an extra push and you'll publish more now. I think, or take the show on the road, so to speak, because that's where that's where I would see a lot of that naturally. That's
kind of what I'm feeling. So you might be right.
Exciting. You'll have to let us know. But let me know for sure. I'm like, oh, do you have any other questions or any things you want to bring up before we look at Lindsay's?
No, I'm good.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's awesome.
Yeah, you're welcome. This is fun.
I'm so glad what better luck, really. Okay, Lindsay, let's go to you.
Okay.
There you are. All right, so we can, we have another Scorpio rising. Must be the flavor.
Yeah.
Flavor of the day. And yeah, yep. And you have a Pluto conjunct Uranus in the 11th. Lindsay has Mercury in Aquarius retrograde conjunct the Sun in the 4th house. So, Lindsay, what would you is there, like, based now that you've heard us go on for the time here, is there anything that stands out for you?
I see more now how Mercury plays a role in how I present myself. I see, it's funny because I laughed at your slides with Prince.
I saw
that because, can you see?
Oh, no, yeah, you're perfect.
The symbol?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Between you and Charlene, this has been the best volunteers, and this is awesome.
I'm a huge Prince fan, huge. And, just recently got this at his passing. And it just really speaks to me, just the way that he was that quiet truth, that genius that, he spoke through metaphors, through his lyrics. He was a good balance to me, being Gemini, and had so much to say about so many things, and then was so private and so reserved. So anyways, but the Mercury part of it was, I love to write. I used to have a blog of photographer. It's like my creative aspect is very mercurial, and it also, for me, on the physical level, it's the same. I have issues with just being blowing out my system, my nervous system, the imbalance, a lot of imbalance. I just want to go, do it. And then I just completely deplete myself.
Me too.
And it's overwhelming right now, and it's hard because I'm trying to balance, because I'm a newer student. I'm brand new to all of this. I've only been in it for a year. So it's just can be overwhelming. It's like so much information. I don't know if you guys can remember what it was like when you all started.
Well, yeah, and I didn't start. We have a lot of old timers on here, but I didn't start my proper program until 2010. So I'm still in comparison to the old timers, I'm still a baby. One thing, Lauren Nalbandian was my first teacher, continues to be my teacher, but I did a 3-year program with her, and one thing she really encouraged me to do, which is funny, I find myself still redoing it or picking up the pieces with this technique, is she said, if you really want to know the signs and planets, You got to slow down and pick one at a time, and you channel it, you meditate with it, you be with it on your jog, be with it when you have your coffee, be with it when you're, you know, in your moments, and you let it reveal itself to you. Because we do have a tendency in astrology, or I guess I speak for myself, I have a tendency to try to force something on me, right? I read and I study and this person tells me this, and that is wonderful, but astrology really lives in you. And if you let it breathe and come through, like, you will have your own relationship, and then it will be different. And so I wish I would have done that a little more when I was starting. Like, I wanted to know everything. I have a South Node in Gemini. I mean, I wanted to know everything, and I wanted to be the smartest, and I wanted to be the best, and I wanted, you know, all these things. And, you know, we laugh, but I had reached a point where I had to go back. It took me, let's put it this way, it took me a long time to actually be ready to really learn. And so I honestly can say at this point in my life, and I will be 44 in a few weeks here, like, I'm at the first point where I feel like I actually have room to sort of shut up and show up and, like, absorb something, which is interesting because my own body doesn't, like, physically, like, digestively, I have terrible absorption issues. So I'm saying these things are like, you know, we can say as above, as so below, as without, so within. I mean, truly. So if you were inclined to, you know, choosing a planet first would be really nothing different than choosing, you know, that's a way to learn it.
Oh yeah.
And you'd be I mean, you, in some ways, you would have really authentic information then to share and use, you know. And I think it's just, there's something exciting about letting an archetype reveal through you. Do you feel like one thing I was going to mention for you with yours in the 4th house, you know, my natal Mercury is also in the 4th house, and you know, 4th house doesn't generally have very good agency, meaning it's hard for things to move in the 4th house. It's like, you know, imagination's awesome. If you're anything like me, you will have all kinds of creativity and imagination and deep soul emotional connection, but it's hard sometimes to get traction or agency out there. So 1st house is one way, you know, to move it out of the cellar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and visible. Also, 4th house is sometimes like, it's, you know, that's midnight time, like, people don't see you there.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
So if you want,
Unstuck.
yeah. And also, I would be curious for you, you know, with yours all married up to the sun there,
Mm-hmm.
not that it would move off the sun if you moved it to the 1st, but choosing it first in some ways, it's not that it would, again, they would still be in conjunction, that, like, that's never going to change, but if you choose one, like, for me, I felt like when I have a Mars moon conjunction, and when I chose Mars first, there was a part of me, in my journal, I was like, I'm so glad to be rid of that, like, depleting life-sucking moon, which I love my moon, by the way, but I had this moment of, like, I just, like, I'm pushing it to the side for a second, you know.
Right.
Now, next year, I'm going to probably choose moon as one of my first ones because I didn't nurture myself enough with the Mars first, so balance the lesson. But that's something to be said for with choosing a planet first, can kind of alleviate or separate the conjunction, because conjunctions, like a Mercury sun doesn't have any idea what it's like to not have them together. That's how I think about it, right? They kind of function as one. It's hard to see separately.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Getting a different perspective for sure. Because you're, like you said, what you're thinking is your experience. And if I'm always thinking, well, I'm just sun conjunct Mercury and that's how I do life, that's because you think it that way. Your consciousness is telling you that, but by moving it to the 1st and experience it a different way, who's to say it couldn't be that way?
No, I mean,
you know, everything can be, you can experience. Yeah, I like it. I think it's really expansive, and I like that, looking at my life from a different perspective, and probably that would really help me get out, like you said, like when you're in the 4th and you're just kind of, you got all these crazy ideas and you're not sharing them, you're not bringing them above. They're all low.
Yeah, I look at it this way, like, the 1st house lets them breathe. Imagine, like, the minute you're born, I mean, I realize it's also traumatic the moment we're born, right? We usually scream, but it's that big breath, right? I think in some ways, I mean, the 12th house can also feel like a womb, but so can the 4th house. And so there is this sort of bringing it out into your own. The other thing about the fourth house is, as you know, it's very, very linked to family stuff, you know, so anything happening in the fourth house is going to almost always have a flavor of, you know, that biological, genetic, you know, roots. And there's a wealth of beautiful things to come through that. So that is, I'm not saying that in any way to say that we want to separate from it, but it's nice sometimes for a while to come out in the space of just, I name myself, right? The fourth house would be my parents named me. The first house, or the fourth house would be, you know, I'm having the story that was, I was born into my story and my story is happening, right? The first house would be, I'm giving birth to my story.
Right.
So it's just a little different flavor, which for me feels good. But, you know, I have Aries rising, so that's like, that is a, you know, that's a happy theme for me. But I would imagine that with that, all that Aquarius going on, I mean, you know, you want to do your own thing too.
Right. There's the paradox.
Yeah.
You know, I think the beginning of my life is more family oriented for sure. And family is really important to me. And I have 2 kids and been married for 24 years. And I think with my chart, I think it reflects there's a shift going on right now. And that shift is, you know, the other side of me and my other interests. And I've done everything but astrology, and I want to do professionally. And it's just a huge shift for me. I mean, so as my kids get older now and that winds down, and I feel like I'm kind of coming out into this new phase.
But it's so beautiful, right? Because Mercury and Aquarius, I mean, Aquarius being, you know, we oftentimes say Aquarius is rulership of astrology. So you literally have the mind wired for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the fourth house, which gives you emotional depth and access and empathy and the ability to translate images. I mean, so really just looking at a retrograde is just you know, it's to reclaim that. So, you know, I look at that as, sounds like a perfect progression to me and a very natural progression. Yeah. And what a fun identity. I mean, Mercury conjunct the sun, right? I mean, in some respects, you know, your mind is right. I mean, you know, your mind is who you are, but this is about, I think, and you alluded to it earlier, but perhaps making a new story up about what that means, you know, even what our mind means, like, especially with your wiring, like I wasn't kidding when I said we barely scratched the surface with Mercury.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know that we can. It's funny because like Mercury is all about making sense of things, but is it really? You know, I mean, I would really challenge that. Is it really about making sense? Because maybe what really makes sense is that nothing makes sense. And that would be a very mercurial kind of, you know, back to Prince, I was thinking about this as Mercury being the guide of souls. I mean, look at the spiritual depth. Look at how Prince, through pop music, if you will, literally probably guided a lot of people to places they didn't even know they went, you know, in the music, which is another beautiful example of what Mercury, you know, can do. Mercury knows how to speak to the crowd, how to speak the native language.
Excuse me, Tara, you have a few minutes left.
Are there questions?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay.
Does anyone have a question? Please go ahead.
And Lindsay, you might still have something too. I wasn't meaning to cut you off. I just wasn't sure if there was anybody waiting for us.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perhaps
anybody else?
Could you stop share there, please?
Oh, yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, anyone? Any comments, questions? Well, that was certainly lively with all that Mercury in the first. Really good, really good. Okay.
Thank you, Lindsay and Charlene. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us.
Oh, thank you. It was fun.
Elizabeth in the chat says, wow, that was a mercurial presentation. You embodied it.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Tara. We'll see you next time. Thank you from all of us. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. That was excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.